While the rich man humiliated her in the middle of the farm, everyone laughed. But the old horse, forgotten in the corner, did something that silenced even the bosses. Dawn painted Kentucky's rolling hills in gold and amber hues as Maria Rodriguez slipped out of her narrow bunk bed, careful not to wake the other 5 workers crowded into the cramped wooden cabin. She moved in shadows, her small frame barely disturbing the stillness of early morning. At 22, Maria's hands already bore the calluses of someone twice her age, evidence of the life she'd left behind in Oaxaca and the new one she'd carved out here, in the shadows of America's horse country. 5 years had passed since she'd crossed the desert with nothing but a small backpack and a faded photograph of her grandmother. The journey had claimed the lives of 2 others in her group. Maria still woke sometimes with their faces haunting her dreams, their thirst-cracked lips forming words she couldn't hear. Outside, mist clung to the immaculate white fences of Silver Creek Farm, the contrast sharp between the pristine thoroughbred paradise and the peeling paint of the workers' quarters hidden behind a stand of trees. Maria pulled her worn jacket tighter and began the half-mile walk to the stables, her steps quick and practiced. The sooner she arrived, the more time she'd have alone with the horses before the official workday began. The main stable loomed before her, an architectural showcase of Kentucky horse aristocracy, gleaming wood, polished brass, and perfect symmetry. Inside, the air carried the sweet scent of fresh hay mingled with the earthy richness of well-bred horses. Maria moved through the corridor, her presence disturbing nothing, her footsteps practiced in their quietness. "Hola, Estrella," she whispered, stopping at the first stall. The chestnut mare nickered softly in recognition. Maria slipped her a piece of carrot saved from last night's dinner, stroking the white blaze between her eyes. "¿Cómo amaneciste, hermosa?" she asked, inquiring about the horse's mourning in the Spanish that flowed most naturally from her lips when she was alone. Maria continued down the row, greeting each horse by name, noting which ones seemed restless or unwell. By the time she reached the end of the stable, she had a mental list. Midnight Star needed his front left hoof checked for tenderness. Kingmaker wasn't finishing his grain. Belladonna seemed agitated in a way that suggested early signs of colic. She would mention none of this when the American stable hands arrived. Experience had taught her that suggestions from a Mexican cleaning girl were rarely welcomed, regardless of their accuracy. "You're early again, Maria." She startled at Carl's voice, turning to find the weathered stable manager standing in the doorway, his face impassive in the growing light. At 50-something, Carl's leathery skin and permanent squint spoke of decades under the Kentucky sun, managing horses worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. "Good morning, Mr. Carl," she replied, lowering her eyes instinctively. "I just finish early if I start early." Carl studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I'm putting you on Belladonna today. She kicked Tom yesterday. Seems agitated." Maria nodded, hiding her small smile. She'd already noticed the mare's discomfort. "Yes, sir. And Thunder's pride needs his stall mucked out. No one wants to do it since he bit Johnson." "I do it, no problem," she replied, keeping her voice neutral despite knowing she'd been assigned the 2 most difficult horses. Again. Carl gave a short nod and turned to leave, then paused. "Those horses," he began, looking back at her with something almost like curiosity. "They calm down when you're around. What's your secret?" Maria's heart quickened at the unexpected question. She clutched her broom tighter, afraid to share too much. "No secret, Mr. Carl. I just respect them. I talk quiet. I move slow." Carl seemed to consider this, then shrugged. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. But don't let Mr. Whitaker see you singing to them or whatever it is you do. He doesn't believe in that alternative stuff." He left her standing there, surprised by the closest thing to acknowledgement she'd received in the 2 years she'd worked at Silver Creek Farm. By mid-morning, the stable was alive with activity. Trainers shouted instructions, exercise riders trotted thoroughbreds to the training track, veterinarians made their rounds. Maria moved like a ghost among them, invisible except when needed for manual labor or cleaning. She was sweeping the main corridor when the commotion began. A gleaming black trailer with gold lettering pulled up outside, and immediately the stable's atmosphere changed. Trainers stopped their work, stable hands gathered, and an energy of anticipation electrified the air. "He's here," someone whispered. Maria pressed herself against the wall, continuing to sweep while watching from beneath lowered lashes. 6 men approached the trailer, led by Frank, the farm's head veterinarian, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and permanent worry lines. "Easy now," Frank called as the trailer's ramp lowered. "Remember what I told you. No sudden movements." The men positioned themselves strategically around the trailer's exit. A moment of tense silence fell, broken by the sudden thunderous sound of hooves striking metal from inside. Even from a distance, Maria could feel the rage and terror emanating from the unseen animal. When he finally emerged, half dragged, half fighting, Maria's breath caught in her throat. The black stallion was magnificent, even in his diminished state. Standing nearly 17 hands high, his coat, though dull from neglect, still caught hints of sunlight in its midnight depths. But it was his eyes that held Maria transfixed, wild, intelligent, and filled with such profound distrust that she felt an immediate kinship with the animal. "Jesus Christ," muttered one of the handlers as the stallion reared suddenly, powerful front legs pawing the air. "That thing's a killer." The men struggled to control him, their faces strained with effort and fear. Blood appeared on the stallion's flank where a chain bit into his skin, but he seemed beyond registering the pain, consumed by his desperate attempt to escape. "Get him into the isolation stall at the end," Frank ordered. "The one with the reinforced door." Maria watched as they fought their way down the corridor, the stallion's hooves slipping on the polished concrete, his muscles bunching and releasing in waves of panic and defiance. As they passed, his wild eye caught hers for the briefest moment, a flash of connection that made her shiver. "That animal valeu cada centavo há 2 anos, but now he's not worth the feed he eats," Frank said to Carl once the stallion was finally secured, switching unconsciously between English and the Portuguese he'd picked up from Brazilian grooms. His former trainer in California, Jack Palmer, practically destroyed him, used methods that should be criminal. Carl shook his head. "Mr. Whitaker thinks he can rehabilitate and resell him for more." "Whitaker gave us 3 months," Frank replied quietly. "After that, it's the slaughterhouse." Maria felt her throat tighten at the casual death sentence. She'd heard such conversations before. Thoroughbreds were investments, and damaged investments were disposed of. Throughout the day, she found excuses to pass by the isolation stall. Each time, the black stallion, Thunder Spirit, she'd learned his name from the paperwork left on Carl's desk, was in constant motion, circling his confinement, muscles twitching, head low as though carrying an invisible weight. As the sun set and workers departed, Maria lingered, claiming she needed to finish cleaning the feed room. When the stable finally emptied, she made her way quietly to Thunder Spirit's stall. The stallion was still pacing, his movements jerky with exhaustion and stress. Even in the dim evening light, Maria could see the scars across his flanks, old whip marks and newer wounds from the day's struggle. "Shh, tranquilo, hermoso," she whispered, not touching the door but standing where he could see her clearly. "Yo también conozco el miedo." At the sound of her soft Spanish, the stallion froze mid-stride. His ears swiveled toward her, nostrils flaring as he drew in her scent. For a heartbeat, they simply regarded each other, the undocumented immigrant and the discarded champion, both existing on borrowed time in a world that valued them only for what they could produce. Then Thunder Spirit charged the door, front hooves striking the wood with explosive force. Maria didn't flinch. She remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled and even, her eyes holding his, not in challenge, but in recognition. "I know," she continued in Spanish. "They hurt you. You trusted, and they betrayed that trust." The stallion struck the door again, but with less force. His breathing came in ragged snorts, sides heaving. "You're going to end up dead if you stay there," a voice called from the shadows, making Maria jump. Bobby, one of the night watchmen, emerged into the corridor. That horse has already sent 3 men to the hospital. He's not violent, Maria replied, surprising herself with her boldness. He's afraid. Bobby laughed. It's just an animal, girl, and a pretty broken one at that. Maria turned to leave, aware she'd already said too much. As she moved away, something extraordinary happened. Thunder Spirit approached the stall door, extending his muzzle not to bite or strike, but as if trying to catch her scent. He remained there, trembling slightly, as Maria paused. In his dark eye, she saw not the mindless rage the others described, but something painfully familiar. The desperate wariness of a being who had learned that the world was fundamentally unsafe, that trust led only to pain. Bobby stared, scratching his head in confusion. What the hell was that? Maria allowed herself a small smile as she continued down the corridor. Over her shoulder, she offered the truth as she saw it. He just wants someone who sees him truly. As if understanding her words, Thunder Spirit released a soft nickering sound. Different from his earlier cries of rage, a tentative note of recognition that followed Maria into the night. Behind her, the broken champion, and before her, the long walk back to a crowded cabin where she'd sleep briefly before returning to her invisible existence. Yet for the first time since crossing the border, Maria felt a strange sense of purpose stirring in her chest, a recognition that perhaps she and this discarded horse might somehow save each other in a world that had no place for either of them. Behind Maria, the broken champion, and before her, the long walk back to a crowded cabin where she'd sleep briefly before returning to her invisible existence. Yet for the first time since crossing the border, Maria felt a strange sense of purpose stirring in her chest, a recognition that perhaps she and this discarded horse might somehow save each other in a world that had no place for either of them. The roosters hadn't yet announced dawn when Maria slipped from her narrow bed, careful not to wake the others. Outside, the Kentucky air carried the first hint of spring, a subtle sweetness beneath the lingering chill. She crouched behind the workers' cabin, checking on the small garden she'd planted in an abandoned toolbox, herbs her grandmother had taught her to cultivate for healing. Arnica for muscle pain, aloe for open wounds, chamomile for calming the spirit. "Grow strong," she whispered, touching the delicate leaves. "Someone needs you." Maria gathered a few mature leaves, wrapping them carefully in a damp cloth before tucking them into her pocket. The eastern sky had barely begun to lighten as she made her way toward the stables, arriving a full hour before her shift was scheduled to begin. The main barn stood quiet, most horses still dozing in the peaceful moments before the day's activities began. She moved silently down the corridor until she reached the isolation stall at the far end. Thunder Spirit was awake, standing motionless in the center of his space, ears pivoting at her approach. Unlike yesterday's violent reaction, today he merely watched, nostrils flaring slightly as he caught her scent. Dark eyes tracked her every movement, suspicious, yet somehow less hostile. "Buenos dias," Maria said softly, settling herself on an overturned bucket several feet from the stall door. "Did you sleep at all?" The stallion's ears flicked forward at the sound of her voice. His coat gleamed dully in the dim light, once powerful muscles evident beneath his frame despite his diminished condition. He shifted his weight, the movement revealing fresh abrasions where the handlers had struggled with him yesterday. From her pocket, Maria withdrew the small guitar she carried everywhere, her father's parting gift before fever had taken him when she was 12. Its worn surface bore the imprints of her family's history, each scratch a memory. She strummed softly, the melody flowing naturally into a lullaby her grandmother had sung to soothe colicky foals in their village. "My abuela taught me this song," she explained between verses. "She said music speaks when words cannot reach pain." Thunder Spirit's breathing changed, growing deeper, less erratic. He lowered his head slightly, not in defeat but as though listening more intently. When Maria finished the song, the silence between them felt different, a shared pause rather than a barrier. "You were someone important once," she continued in Spanish, putting away her guitar. "But that doesn't matter to me. Here, we are both nobodies, no? She stayed until she heard the first sounds of the day shift arriving, then slipped away, resuming her role as the invisible cleaning girl. Throughout the morning, Maria observed from a distance as 3 different trainers attempted to approach Thunder Spirit. Each ended in the same way. The stallion charging the door, teeth bared, eyes wild with distrust. The 3rd trainer left cursing, a torn sleeve evidence of how close he'd come to serious injury. "That animal's not worth the trouble," the man muttered to Frank as Maria swept nearby, pretending not to listen. "Whitaker's throwing money away." Frank shook his head. "You can't break a horse that's already broken. Whatever Palmer did in California, it destroyed something essential in that stallion." Their voices faded as they walked away, but their dismissal lingered in the air. Maria continued sweeping, her mind working through what she'd overheard. Not broken, she thought. Just speaking a language none of them understand. That evening, after finishing her assigned tasks, Maria returned to the isolation stall with a small bundle. Carrot pieces she'd saved from her meager lunch and fresh aloe vera from her hidden garden. "I brought something for your cuts," she explained, showing Thunder Spirit the plant. "This might sting, but then it will cool the pain." The stallion watched her with the hypervigilance of the chronically traumatized, his muscles tense with readiness to flee or fight. Maria began reading aloud from a letter she'd received from her mother, her voice creating a rhythmic backdrop as she slowly, deliberately approached the stall. "My brother Pablo has grown 3 inches this year," she translated from the Spanish. "He asks when his sister will return from the north." Thunder Spirit's ears remained fixed on her voice as she reached through the bars, offering a carrot piece on her flattened palm. For several long moments, he didn't move. Then, with deliberate caution, he stretched his neck, nostrils flaring as he assessed whether threat accompanied the offering. When his lips finally brushed her palm, taking the carrot with surprising gentleness, Maria felt tears prick behind her eyes. She remained perfectly still, allowing him to retreat and process this small victory. "When someone hurts you, it's hard to trust again," she said softly in Spanish. "I understand this better than they do." Over the next week, Maria established a pattern. Before dawn, she would visit with her guitar, playing quiet melodies while Thunder Spirit gradually relaxed in her presence. During her regular shift, she maintained her distance, observing as the official trainers continued their aggressive approaches, each ending in escalating fear responses from the stallion. In the evenings, she would return with small offerings, herbs for his wounds, special treats, and most importantly, her steady, undemanding presence. She began applying healing poultices to the areas she could reach through the bars, explaining each herb and its purpose. "This is arnica," she would say, showing him the plant before use, "for the deep pain in your muscles." The contrast between approaches could not have been more stark. During official training sessions, men entered with whips and restraints, attempting to establish dominance through fear. Under Maria's care, Thunder Spirit began showing subtle signs of healing, both physical and emotional. His eyes grew less wild, his breathing more regulated in her presence. 10 days after Thunder Spirit's arrival, Jeremiah Whitaker made his weekly inspection of the farm. Tall and imposing in custom boots and a tailored suit, the oil magnate moved through the stables like he was conducting a military inspection, Carl trailing anxiously behind him. "Where's my $6 million project?" Whitaker demanded, voice carrying down the corridor. Maria, cleaning tack nearby, tensed as the men approached Thunder Spirit's stall. The stallion, sensing the change in energy, immediately began pacing, head high, nostrils flared. "No progress?" Whitaker asked, observing the stallion's agitated state. "It's been almost 2 weeks. What am I paying you people for?" Frank stepped forward with a clinical assessment. "Mr. Whitaker, we've tried multiple approaches. This horse has deep-seated trauma, the kind that doesn't respond to conventional methods." "Conventional methods?" Whitaker scoffed. "Use whatever methods necessary. That animal cost more than the houses of everyone working here combined." His face flushed with anger as he pointed at Thunder Spirit. "If you can't fix him by the Kentucky Derby, I'll turn him into dog food." The threat hung in the air as Whitaker stormed off, leaving a wake of tension behind him. Maria continued polishing bridles, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed anger. To speak of any living creature with such callous ownership revolted her, but she kept her face carefully blank. Later that evening, as Maria sang softly while cleaning the corridor outside Thunder Spirit's stall, she didn't notice Carl standing in the shadows, watching. The stallion stood near the door, his attention fixed on her voice, ears forward in a posture of calm attentiveness that he showed to no one else. "What are you doing?" Carl's question came without anger, startling Maria into silence. "Nothing, senor," she replied, lowering her head. "Just singing while I work." Carl studied the unusual tableau, the dangerous stallion standing peacefully, listening to the young Mexican woman's voice. "The horse seems to like it." Maria remained silent, afraid of overstepping. After a long moment, Carl said something that surprised her. "Keep singing to the horse." He glanced over his shoulder, then added quietly, "But don't let Whitaker see. He doesn't believe in these alternatives." This unexpected alliance marked a turning point. Over the following days, Maria noticed small, silent forms of support emerging. Ramon, a Mexican stable hand who had worked at Silver Creek for 15 years, began leaving extra oats and carrots near Thunder Spirit's stall, with a knowing nod to Maria. Sophie, Frank's teenage daughter who helped on weekends, approached Maria one Saturday morning. "I saw you with him," the girl said, glancing toward Thunder Spirit's stall. "The way you sit and sing. It's different from what my dad does." Maria tensed, unsure if this was a trap. "I brought these," Sophie continued, pulling several dog-eared books from her backpack. "They're about natural rehabilitation for traumatized horses. My dad thinks I'm wasting my time, but..." She shrugged, offering the books to Maria. "Maybe they'll help." Maria accepted the offering with quiet gratitude. "Thank you." "My dad says that horse is a lost cause," Sophie added, watching Thunder Spirit over the stall door. "But I've seen how he looks at you. It's different." The community of silent supporters grew. Carl assigned fewer tasks to Maria, tacitly allowing her more time with Thunder Spirit. Frank began leaving the isolation stall unlocked after his morning rounds. Sophie brought more books and occasionally joined Maria, sitting quietly while she sang or read to the stallion. 3 months after Thunder Spirit's arrival, on a night when moonlight flooded through the stable windows, Maria made a decision that sent her heart racing. After ensuring she was truly alone, she quietly opened the stall door and stepped inside Thunder Spirit's space, something no one had successfully done without restraints since his arrival. The stallion immediately retreated to the far corner, his body tense, eyes wide with alarm at this boundary crossing. "Está bien," she whispered, extending her open hand while keeping her eyes lowered, avoiding direct eye contact that could be interpreted as a challenge. "We are friends, remember?" For several minutes, they remained frozen in a tableau of possibility and risk. Maria kept her breathing steady, her posture open but non-threatening. Thunder Spirit's nostrils flared as he processed her familiar scent now present in his space. Then, with hesitation evident in every muscle, the stallion took one step forward, then another, until his massive muzzle gently touched Maria's outstretched palm. Silent tears streamed down Maria's face at this profound moment of trust. "Gracias," she whispered. Later that week, Whitaker returned with potential investors, businessmen in expensive suits eager to see the famous racehorses before signing contracts. The group moved efficiently through the stables, Whitaker narrating the value and bloodlines of each animal like a museum curator displaying precious artifacts. "And here is Thunder Spirit," Whitaker announced grandly as they approached the isolation stall. "A small rehabilitation project we're working on." His words died abruptly at the sight before them. Maria inside the stall, gently brushing the gleaming coat of the stallion everyone had deemed untouchable. Thunder Spirit stood perfectly calm, almost drowsy under her touch. "Who the hell authorized you to enter that stall?" Whitaker exploded, his face flushing with fury. Maria froze, fear visible in her eyes. I'm just caring for him, senor. Get out immediately, Whitaker ordered, flinging open the stall door and drawing the riding crop he always carried. This is a $6 million property, not a pet for an immigrant to play with. As the crop sliced through the air toward Maria, Thunder Spirit reacted instinctively, positioning himself between her and the threat. The protective gesture only enraged Whitaker further, who attempted to strike the horse as well. Mr. Whitaker, Carl intervened quickly. Perhaps you'd like to see this first. He pulled a stopwatch from his pocket. She's been training him in the early mornings. Yesterday he ran a mile in 1:36, almost his championship time. The investors, watching with shocked expressions, began murmuring among themselves, clearly impressed. One of them, Dr. Eleanor Harrington, a prominent horse breeder and philanthropist, stepped forward. "How did you accomplish this, dear?" she asked Maria, completely ignoring Whitaker. "No lo hizo," Maria responded humbly. "It was him who allowed it." That evening, against every safety rule of the stable, Maria mounted Thunder Spirit for the first time, using no saddle, only a thin rope around his neck as a guide. Under the astonished gaze of Carl, Sophie, and several workers who had become her secret protectors, she and the stallion galloped across the training field, as if they were a single creature. The young immigrant bent low over the powerful neck, whispering words only the horse could hear. That evening, against every safety rule of the stable, Maria mounted Thunder Spirit for the first time, using no saddle, only a thin rope around his neck as a guide. Under the astonished gaze of Carl, Sophie, and several workers who had become her secret protectors, she and the stallion galloped across the training field as if they were a single creature. The young immigrant bent low over the powerful neck, whispering words only the horse could hear. The moon hung full and luminous over the Kentucky hills as Maria contemplated its silver face through the small clouded window of her cabin. Sleep eluded her, her mind replaying the sensation of Thunder Spirit beneath her, his powerful muscles moving in rhythm with her body, the trust that had allowed him to accept her weight upon his back after months of refusing human contact. It felt like a miracle, but Maria knew better. It wasn't mystical. It was a language of patience she had learned from her grandmother, watching her coax injured animals back to health in their village. Trust isn't given, her abuela would say. It must be earned with every breath, every touch. Tonight, Maria would take the biggest risk yet. When the cabin fell silent with the deep breathing of exhausted workers, she slipped from her bed. The floorboards creaked beneath her careful steps as she retrieved her small bundle of healing herbs and her father's guitar. Outside, the spring air carried the scent of blooming dogwoods, a sweetness that belied the tension coiling in her stomach. The stables stood silent under the moonlight, the expensive thoroughbreds dozing in their climate-controlled stalls. Maria moved like a shadow until she reached Thunder Spirit's isolation area at the far end. The stallion was awake, as if expecting her, his ears pricking forward at her approach. "Buenas noches, mi amigo," she whispered, her fingers trembling slightly as she unlatched the stall door. This would be her first time entering his space at night, when the darkness might trigger his defensive instincts. Thunder Spirit retreated to the far corner, his body language instantly shifting to alertness. In the dim light filtering through the windows, his eyes reflected an inner struggle. Trust wrestling with trauma, memory fighting against hope. Maria stepped inside, leaving the door open behind her. Not for her escape, but for his sense of freedom. She moved with deliberate slowness, her eyes cast slightly downward, avoiding direct challenge. "It's just me," she said softly in Spanish. "You know my voice, my scent." The stallion's nostrils flared, pulling in deep breaths as he processed her familiar presence in this new context. His muscles trembled beneath his dark coat, ready for either flight or aggression. Maria settled cross-legged on the clean straw, placing her guitar across her lap. She began to strum quietly, the notes hanging in the air between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. The melody was one she had played for him many times from outside the stall, a lullaby that spoke of mountains and home. For what felt like hours, they remained frozen in their respective positions, the broken horse and the displaced woman, each carrying wounds invisible to the casual observer. Maria continued playing, her fingers finding the strings even as her eyes remained softly focused on Thunder Spirit. Then, almost imperceptibly, the stallion lowered his head a fraction. His breathing deepened. One step forward, then another. Each movement calculated, testing whether danger would follow. "That's it," Maria encouraged, her voice barely above a whisper. "Decide for yourself. I will not force anything." When Thunder Spirit stood just beyond arm's reach, he stopped. Maria could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear each breath as it entered and left his powerful lungs. She set her guitar aside with careful movements and extended her hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. "We have time," she said. "All the time you need." Minutes passed in perfect stillness. Then, with hesitation palpable in every muscle, Thunder Spirit stretched his neck forward. His muzzle hovered above her palm, warm breath caressing her skin, before making contact. The gentlest touch imaginable. Tears slipped silently down Maria's cheeks, not from fear or relief, but from recognition. In that moment of connection, the divisions between them, human and animal, powerful and powerless, dissolved into something deeper and more honest. "Gracias," she whispered, remaining perfectly still as the stallion processed this new development in their relationship. For the next 3 nights, Maria repeated this ritual, entering Thunder Spirit's space with respect, sitting quietly, allowing him to approach on his terms. Each night he came to her more quickly, stayed longer, permitted more touch. By the 3rd night she was able to run her hands along his neck, feeling the powerful muscles that had carried him to championships before the world had broken him. During her regular shifts, Maria maintained her distance, watching as the official trainers continued their unsuccessful attempts to dominate the stallion. She noticed how Thunder Spirit seemed to understand the difference, how he played a role for them, maintaining the fierce, untouchable persona they expected, while revealing another self entirely to her in their private moments. On the 10th night of their midnight sessions, as a full moon once again illuminated the stable, Maria made a decision that sent her heart racing. After their usual greeting, after Thunder Spirit had relaxed into her gentle grooming, she moved to his side and placed one hand on his withers. "May I?" she asked, though the question needed no translation between them. Thunder Spirit stood perfectly still, neither inviting nor rejecting. Maria took a deep breath and, with graceful motion, swung herself onto his bare back. For one terrifying moment, the stallion went rigid beneath her. His ears flattened, his breathing quickened. Maria remained perfectly balanced, not grabbing for control, simply existing in the new shared space between them. "I trust you," she whispered, placing one hand gently on his neck. "And you can trust me." Gradually, incrementally, Thunder Spirit relaxed. His ears swiveled back to catch her voice, then forward again. Without any command from Maria, he took a careful step forward, then another, adjusting to the feel of a rider who asked nothing, demanded nothing. They moved together in the confined space of the stall, Maria allowing Thunder Spirit to set the pace and direction. This wasn't training, it was conversation, a physical dialogue between two beings finding a common language. Later that week, while Maria was mucking out stalls in the main barn, Sophie burst in with flushed cheeks and excited eyes. "Maria, I just overheard my dad talking with Carl. Mr. Whitaker is coming tomorrow with investors. Big ones. They want to see all the top horses, including Thunder Spirit." Maria felt her stomach drop. But Thunder Spirit isn't ready for strangers. Not many strangers at once. "I know. Dad's worried too. He said they'll probably have to sedate him, which Whitaker doesn't want because it makes the horses look..." Sophie searched for the word. "Dopey. Unimpressive." That night, Maria spent extra time with Thunder Spirit, running her hands over his coat, which had begun to regain its natural luster under her care. "Tomorrow will be difficult," she told him in Spanish. "Many strangers will come. They will be loud, demanding. Remember what we've practiced, staying calm when afraid." The stallion nuzzled her shoulder, a gesture he had recently begun to offer, affection freely given rather than extracted through force. Morning came with a flurry of activity as Silver Creek Farm prepared for Whitaker's inspection. Staff scrubbed the already immaculate facilities, horses were groomed to perfection, and an atmosphere of tense anticipation settled over the property. Maria went about her usual tasks, keeping her head down while listening carefully to the conversations swirling around her. "Those Japanese investors are looking to drop millions," she overheard Frank telling Carl. "Whitaker wants everything perfect." By midday, a procession of luxury vehicles rolled up the pristine driveway. Men in tailored suits and women in designer outfits emerged, greeted enthusiastically by Whitaker himself, a tall figure in custom boots and a Stetson hat that marked him as a gentleman rancher despite his oil industry fortune. Maria watched from the shadows as the group toured the main facilities, Whitaker gesturing grandly as he described bloodlines and racing victories. They moved methodically toward the isolation area where Thunder Spirit was kept, and Maria felt her chest tighten with anxiety. Making a split-second decision, she slipped away from her assigned task and hurried through a back passage to Thunder Spirit's stall. Without hesitation, she unlatched the door and stepped inside, quickly beginning to brush the stallion's coat as if this had been her assigned duty all along. Through the open stall door, she could hear Whitaker's booming voice growing closer. "And here we have Thunder Spirit," he announced grandly as the group approached. "A special project we've been working on." His words died abruptly as he registered the scene before him, Maria inside the stall, calmly brushing the stallion that had been deemed too dangerous to approach. Thunder Spirit stood relaxed under her touch, his eyes half closed in contentment. "Who the hell authorized you to be in there?" Whitaker demanded, his face flushing with anger. The investors behind him murmured in surprise. Maria felt fear rise in her throat, but she kept her hand steady on Thunder Spirit's neck. "I am just caring for him, senor," she replied, her voice smaller than she wished. "Get out immediately," Whitaker ordered, yanking open the stall door wider and reaching for the riding crop he always carried tucked into his belt. "This is a $6 million property, not a pet for an immigrant to play with." The crop sliced through the air toward Maria, the sudden movement and hostile energy triggering Thunder Spirit's protective instincts. With surprising gentleness, the stallion shifted his massive body, positioning himself between Maria and the perceived threat. Whitaker's face contorted with fury at this defiance. He attempted to circle around, the crop still raised, now aiming for the horse as well. "Mr. Whitaker," Carl's voice cut through the tension as he stepped forward. "Perhaps you'd like to see this first." From his pocket, he withdrew a stopwatch. "She's been training him in the early mornings. Yesterday he ran a mile in 1:36, almost his championship time." The investors, who had been watching the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions, suddenly showed renewed interest. A tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward from the group. "How extraordinary," she said, addressing Maria directly. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Harrington. May I ask how you achieved this when professional trainers couldn't approach him?" Maria looked from Whitaker's furious face to the genuine curiosity in Dr. Harrington's eyes. "No lo hice yo," she answered honestly. "It was him who allowed it." "Nonsense," Whitaker snapped. "Carl, get her out of there and back to whatever she's supposed to be doing. We'll discuss this situation later." As Maria slipped past the group, she caught Dr. Harrington's thoughtful gaze following her. The woman said nothing more, but a silent communication passed between them, recognition of something authentic amidst the carefully constructed narratives of Silver Creek Farm. The following afternoon, with the investors departed and Whitaker returned to his Houston headquarters, Maria made the boldest move yet. With Sophie standing lookout and Carl pretending not to notice, she led Thunder Spirit from his stall into the training paddock. The stallion moved nervously at first, unaccustomed to open spaces after months of confinement. His powerful muscles bunched beneath his skin, ready for flight. Maria stood quietly beside him, one hand resting lightly on his neck, giving him time to adjust. When Thunder Spirit's breathing steadied, Maria gathered a thin cotton rope and fashioned a simple loop around his neck. Not a restraint, merely a suggestion of connection. With fluid grace, she swung onto his bare back. For a breathless moment, horse and rider remained frozen in mutual assessment. Then, responding to the lightest pressure of Maria's legs, Thunder Spirit began to move. First a walk, then a trot, his stride lengthening with each circuit of the paddock. His ears swiveled back to catch Maria's whispered encouragements, then forward again with newfound confidence. From the fence line, Sophie watched with undisguised wonder. Carl stood beside her, his weathered face unreadable save for a slight softening around the eyes. Several stable hands had paused in their work, drawn by the unusual sight. When Thunder Spirit broke into a gallop, it was not from command but from joy, a remembered freedom long suppressed. Maria moved with him instinctively, her body molded to his rhythm, her hands light on the simple rope. They circled the paddock in perfect harmony, the powerful thoroughbred and the slight young woman becoming a single flowing entity. In 30 years working with horses, I've never seen anything like it, Carl murmured to Sophie, genuine amazement breaking through his usual stoicism. His expression of wonder quickly transformed to concern, however, as the sound of tires on gravel announced an unexpected arrival. Whitaker's black SUV appeared around the bend, returning to the farm when he should have been halfway to Houston by now. Carl knew instantly that the magnate would never accept that an undocumented immigrant had accomplished what his expensive trainers could not, and the realization sent a chill of foreboding through his veins. Carl watched with growing anxiety as Whitaker's black SUV pulled up to the stables. His weathered hands gripped the fence rail tightly, knuckles whitening. "Maria," he called urgently, "get off that horse, now." Maria sensed the sudden tension and guided Thunder Spirit toward the paddock gate with the lightest pressure of her legs. The stallion responded instantly to her subtle cues, their connection so seamless it appeared almost telepathic. As Maria slid from Thunder Spirit's back, the stable erupted into motion. Workers scattered, returning to their assigned tasks with studious focus. Sophie quickly led the stallion back toward his stall while Maria grabbed a pitchfork, pretending to have been cleaning the paddock all along. Whitaker emerged from his vehicle, sunglasses masking his eyes, but not the rigid set of his jaw. He strode directly to Carl, paying no attention to Maria. "I just received a call from Dr. Harrington," he stated without preamble. "She seems unusually interested in our rehabilitation methods with Thunder Spirit." Carl's face remained carefully neutral. "She's a respected breeder, sir, always looking for innovative techniques." "Innovative," Whitaker repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Like letting cleaning staff handle million-dollar investments?" Maria kept her head down, forcing her breathing to remain even despite the fear crawling up her spine. She continued working methodically, moving straw as if her life depended on it, which, in many ways, it did. "The girl has a way with difficult horses," Carl replied cautiously. "It's just an extra resource we're utilizing." Whitaker removed his sunglasses, fixing Carl with a hard stare. "Find out everything about her. Documentation, background, family, everything. I want it on my desk by tomorrow." With that, he turned and walked toward the main office, leaving a wake of tension behind him. Only when the door closed behind him did Maria release the breath she'd been holding. "He knows," she whispered to Carl when she was certain no one else could hear. "He will send me back." Carl's weathered face showed rare emotion. "Just keep your head down for a while. I'll handle Whitaker." But both knew this was a promise he couldn't keep. The news about Thunder Spirit's progress spread quickly through the tight-knit horse community of Lexington. By the following morning, Maria noticed unfamiliar faces appearing at the paddock rails during exercise sessions, prestigious trainers just stopping by to observe the once violent stallion who now moved with renewed grace and purpose. Thunder Spirit seemed to sense the additional scrutiny, his behavior subtly shifting when strangers were present. His ears would flick constantly, monitoring every sound, his muscles tensing beneath Maria's hands as she groomed him. It was as if he was performing the role expected of him, the dangerous horse barely contained, while revealing his true self only to those he had come to trust. "He understands more than they think," Maria explained to Sophie as they worked together in the feed room, measuring grain for the afternoon meals. "He knows when he's being watched, judged." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "Like you." The observation, so simply stated, caught Maria off guard. She paused, scoop in hand, suddenly seeing the parallel that had been invisible to her. Both she and Thunder Spirit existed under constant evaluation, their worth determined by those who held power over their fates. That afternoon, as Maria was filling water buckets, a voice she didn't recognize called her name. Turning, she found herself face to face with Dr. Eleanor Harrington. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Dr. Harrington said, her voice cultured but kind. "I wanted to speak with you privately about your work with Thunder Spirit." Maria's grip tightened on the hose. "I am just doing my job, Senora." "I think we both know that's not true." Eleanor's smile was gentle, but her eyes were shrewd. "I've been breeding and training horses for 30 years. What you've accomplished with that stallion is extraordinary." Maria remained silent, years of survival instincts warning her against believing in the apparent kindness of the wealthy. "I'm hosting a small gathering at my farm this weekend," Eleanor continued. "Just a few breeders interested in humane training methods. I'd like you to demonstrate your techniques." The invitation sent a jolt of panic through Maria. "No puedo, señora. Mr. Whitaker would be furious. I need this job." "Of course." Eleanor nodded, seemingly unsurprised by the refusal. She withdrew a business card from her pocket. "If you change your mind, or if you ever need assistance of any kind, please call me, anytime." Maria tucked the card into her pocket with trembling fingers, murmuring thanks she didn't entirely feel. The interaction left her unsettled, torn between opportunity and danger. That evening, as she sat cross-legged in Thunder Spirit's stall, softly playing her guitar, Maria shared her confusion with the stallion. "People are noticing you," she told him in Spanish. "Noticing us. I don't know if this is good or bad." Thunder Spirit stood nearby, his massive head lowered to her level, ears focused intently on her voice. Since their first ride together, his trust had deepened dramatically. He would now approach her immediately when she entered his space, sometimes resting his head against her shoulder in a gesture that carried the weight of conscious choice. "If I go to this gathering, show them how we work together, maybe others will learn. Maybe other horses will not suffer like you did." She strummed a contemplative chord. "But if Whitaker finds out..." She didn't need to finish the thought. The threat hung in the air between them, understood by both. Later that night, in the crowded cabin she shared with other workers, Maria was surprised when Ramon, usually so private, approached her bunk. "I heard about Dr. Harrington's invitation," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "You should go." Maria stared at him. "How did you—" "Word travels," he interrupted with a small smile, "especially when it concerns one of our own doing something remarkable." He told her how Sophie had been showing videos of Maria and Thunder Spirit to her friends, how the clips had circulated among the younger stable hands and grooms. Without Maria realizing it, a community had formed around her work, people silently supporting, protecting, believing. "It's a chance to show that there are better methods than violence," Ramon urged, "for horses and for people." His words triggered a memory. Maria as a child, watching her grandmother being ridiculed by male healers in Oaxaca, when she suggested gentle herbal treatments for a valuable horse belonging to the town's wealthiest family. The men had laughed, insisted on brutal traditional methods, until her grandmother's approach ultimately saved the animal after their techniques had failed. "What if something goes wrong?" Maria whispered. "What if Thunder Spirit gets frightened? What if I can't explain what I do?" Ramon's expression grew serious. "Some risks are worth taking, not just for ourselves." The following afternoon, with Whitaker safely away in Houston, a small group gathered discreetly behind the training paddock. Eleanor had brought 3 respected horse breeders. Sophie stood nearby, filming with her phone. Carl kept watch at the stable entrance, ready to warn of any unexpected arrivals. Maria led Thunder Spirit from his stall without halter or lead rope. the stallion following her willingly across the yard. The gathered experts watched in silence, their expressions shifting from skepticism to curiosity as horse and handler moved in perfect synchronicity. For healing a horse, Maria began hesitantly, her accented English careful and measured. First, we must understand his miedo, his fear. She explained how traditional training often tries to dominate fear with greater fear, creating obedience but destroying trust. As she spoke, she demonstrated with Thunder Spirit, showing how she used body language, energy, and presence to communicate rather than control. Horses remember everything, she explained, running her hand along Thunder Spirit's scarred flank. His body carries the memory of pain, but also can learn the memory of gentleness. For nearly an hour, Maria demonstrated techniques learned from her grandmother and developed through her own intuition. Thunder Spirit responded to the lightest touch, the softest whisper, executing complex movements with only the subtlest cues from Maria. When she finished, the small audience remained momentarily silent, absorbing what they had witnessed. Then one of the older breeders stepped forward. "I've been training horses for 40 years, he said gruffly. "Never seen anything like this. That animal was deemed untrainable by some of the best in the business." Eleanor smiled. "This is why I wanted you all to see Maria's work firsthand. There are alternatives to the methods our industry has accepted as necessary." As the group discussed what they had observed, Eleanor drew Maria aside. "I meant what I said about assistance," she said quietly. "I can sponsor your work visa as a specialized trainer. Your methods are extraordinary and deserve recognition." The offer left Maria speechless. Legal status had seemed an impossible dream, something she had stopped allowing herself to hope for years ago. Later that evening, as darkness settled over the stables and most workers had departed, Maria returned to check on Thunder Spirit one last time. The day's events had left her mind buzzing with possibilities she hardly dared consider. She was brushing the stallion's gleaming coat when the stable door slammed open. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Whitaker appeared, his face contorted with barely contained rage. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Playing with my property." Maria stepped back instinctively, but Thunder Spirit moved forward, positioning himself between her and Whitaker. The stallion's ears flattened against his head, his posture alerting to the threatening energy emanating from the man. "Do you think I don't know what's been happening here?" Whitaker continued, stepping closer. "My stable manager sneaking around, my veterinarian's daughter filming little demonstrations, my $6 million investment responding to a Mexican cleaning girl instead of professional trainers." Each word landed like a physical blow. Maria forced herself to stand straight, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Whitaker's voice rose. "Do you think I built an empire by letting people steal from me?" "I am not stealing anything, senor," Maria managed to reply. "Aren't you?" Whitaker laughed, without humor. "You think I don't see what's happening? You've manipulated my horse against me. You've turned my staff against me. You've undermined my authority on my own property." Thunder Spirit grew increasingly agitated as Whitaker's voice rose, pawing at the ground and tossing his head in distress. "You think I don't know your status?" Whitaker pressed on. "I have friends in immigration. One word from me, and you and your family in Oaxaca will never see each other again." The direct threat froze Maria's blood. Behind Whitaker, she glimpsed Carl appearing in the doorway, clearly having overheard the confrontation. Thunder Spirit's reaction to the tension was immediate and violent, rearing back with a shrill whinny, striking his hooves against the stall door with enough force to splinter the wood. The display only seemed to confirm Whitaker's accusations. "See?" he snarled. "You're turning this animal against me." He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway to deliver a final threat. "You have 48 hours to stay away from that horse or face the consequences." His eyes narrowed with cruel intent. "And believe me, girl, you don't want to know what those consequences are." As Whitaker's footsteps faded, Maria felt a chill of realization spread through her body. The man wasn't just threatening her job or her stay in America, but Thunder Spirit's very life. Without her, the stallion would quickly revert to being considered irrecoverable and sent to slaughter, exactly as Whitaker had threatened on his first visit. As Whitaker's footsteps faded into the distance, Maria slumped against the stall door, her whole body trembling. Thunder Spirit nudged her shoulder gently, his warm breath tickling her neck as if trying to offer comfort. The irony wasn't lost on her, a creature who had suffered so much abuse now trying to console her in her moment of fear. "What am I going to do?" she whispered in Spanish, burying her face in her hands. The ultimatum hung in the air like a guillotine blade. 48 hours to abandon the bond she had forged, or face consequences that would destroy them both. Thunder Spirit pressed his forehead against her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that brought fresh tears to her eyes. In the dim light of the stable, his dark eyes reflected an intelligence that belied the common perception of horses as simple beasts of burden. He understood threat, he understood fear, and somehow, he understood her. Maria spent that night sitting cross-legged on her thin mattress in the workers' cabin, staring at the business card Eleanor Harrington had given her. The elegant cream stock with raised navy lettering represented a lifeline, but one that required her to take a terrifying leap of faith. "You can't just disappear," Ramon told her quietly the next morning as they filled water buckets together. "Whitaker has connections. He'd find you anywhere in Kentucky." "I could go back to Mexico," Maria replied, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. Going back meant admitting defeat, abandoning not just Thunder Spirit, but the life she had struggled to build. "And leave the horse to die?" Ramon shook his head. "You know that's what will happen." Throughout the day, Maria moved through her tasks like a ghost, her mind racing with impossible choices. Each time she passed Thunder Spirit's stall, she felt his gaze follow her, questioning, trusting, unaware that their fate hung in the balance of a powerful man's ego. In the afternoon, Sophie found Maria in the feed room, measuring grain with mechanical precision. "My dad told me what happened," the teenager said, her face flushed with indignation. "It's not fair. Thunder Spirit is finally getting better because of you." Maria continued measuring, afraid that if she stopped, the emotion building in her chest would overwhelm her. "Life is rarely fair, Sophie." My dad found out something else," Sophie continued, lowering her voice despite the empty room. "Whitaker is planning to enter Thunder Spirit in the Lexington Festival next month. He's going to announce his Senate campaign there, and he wants to use the horse as some kind of symbol." Maria's hand stilled. Thunder Spirit is nowhere near ready for a public event like that. The crowds, the noise, it would terrify him. "I think that's the point," Sophie said grimly. "Dad says Whitaker had him order some kind of stimulants, supposedly vitamins, but—" She trailed off, her implication clear. The pieces suddenly aligned in Maria's mind with horrifying clarity. Whitaker didn't just want her away from Thunder Spirit. He wanted the horse to fail spectacularly in public, proving that his traditional methods were necessary, that gentle approaches were ineffective with problem animals. That evening, Maria sat alone in Thunder Spirit's stall, her guitar untouched beside her. The stallion stood nearby, occasionally lowering his head to nuzzle her hair or shoulder, clearly sensing her distress. "He wants to use you," she whispered, stroking the white star between his eyes. "To show the world that broken things can only be controlled through force, never through healing." Thunder Spirit's ears flicked forward at her voice, his dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her wonder, not for the first time, how much he truly comprehended. A soft knock on the stall door startled them both. Carl stood there, his weathered face grave in the dim light. "You've got company in the tack room," he said quietly. "Go now, while most everyone's at dinner." Maria found not just Ramon waiting in the tack room, but 5 other workers, 3 Mexicans, a Guatemalan groom, and Bobby, the night watchman who had once warned her about Thunder Spirit's dangerous reputation. Their faces reflected varying degrees of concern and determination. "Whitaker's on the warpath," Bobby said without preamble. "Just got off the phone with security. They're doing a document check tomorrow morning. targeting the stable hands first. The news sent a wave of fear through the room. At least half of Silver Creek's workers lacked proper documentation. "This isn't just about you anymore," Ramon explained gently to Maria. "He's using you as an excuse to clean house before his political announcement. Get rid of anyone who might cause problems or speak out." Maria felt sick. "I never meant to put anyone else at risk." "You didn't," said Elena, a Mexican woman who cleaned the offices. "Whitaker did. Men like him always do." As they discussed limited options, the door opened again. Everyone froze until they recognized Sophie, followed by her father, Frank, the veterinarian. "I told Dad everything," Sophie announced. "About the demonstrations, the videos, all of it." Frank looked uncomfortable but resolute. "Whitaker ordered me to administer performance enhancers to Thunder Spirit before the festival. Technically legal for training, but ethically." He shook his head. "Combined with the stress of crowds, it would likely trigger a violent episode. Exactly what Whitaker wants to prove his point about difficult horses." The group fell silent, absorbing this confirmation of Whitaker's intentions. "I could take Thunder Spirit," Maria suggested desperately. "Tonight, find somewhere to hide him." "And be charged with grand theft?" Frank interrupted. "That horse is valued at millions. They'd hunt you down with everything they've got." As a heavy silence settled over the room, the door opened once more. To everyone's shock, Eleanor Harrington stood in the doorway, elegant even in riding clothes, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said calmly, as if finding a secret meeting in a stable tack room was perfectly normal. "But I believe we need to discuss justice, for Maria and for Thunder Spirit." The next hour unfolded with intensity, as Eleanor outlined what she had learned about Whitaker's operations, questionable labor practices, possible tax evasion related to his horse acquisitions, and most damning, a pattern of animal welfare violations carefully concealed by settlements and non-disclosure agreements. "Jeremiah has powerful friends," Eleanor acknowledged, "but so do I. And unlike him, I've spent 40 years building a reputation for integrity in this community." Her plan was audacious but methodical. Document everything, create a network of protection, and most importantly, use Whitaker's own showcase event to expose his methods to the very social and political circles he was trying to impress. "The festival will be his moment to shine," Eleanor explained. "Every important name in Kentucky will be there. If we can show irrefutable evidence of his cruelty at that precise moment." "It's too dangerous," Maria protested. "For everyone here, these people have families, children, and they deserve to work without fear," Eleanor countered gently. "This isn't just about one horse or one person. It's about changing a system that thrives on exploitation of animals and people." As the meeting continued, specific roles emerged. Sophie and her friends would continue documenting training methods throughout the stables, creating a comprehensive record. Frank would provide medical evidence of Thunder Spirit's treatment. Ramon connected Maria with Eduardo Vasquez, an immigration attorney willing to represent her pro bono. "He helped my cousin get asylum," Ramon explained. "We can trust him." Throughout the following week, Maria maintained her distance from Thunder Spirit during daylight hours, seemingly complying with Whitaker's demands. But she watched from afar as the trainers Whitaker had appointed resumed harsh methods with the stallion, undoing months of careful progress. Thunder Spirit's behavior began to change, his eyes growing dull, his movements mechanical. During a training session Maria observed from the hayloft, the stallion submitted to a saddle without fighting, but his entire body trembled with suppressed fear, his spirit visibly dimming under the return to force-based methods. One evening, when Maria risked a brief visit after hours, she found Thunder Spirit standing motionless in his stall, head hanging low, unresponsive even to her voice. Frank had been there earlier, and the empty syringe wrapper in the trash told her everything she needed to know. "What have they done to you?" she whispered, her hand trembling as she stroked his neck. For the first time since their early days, Thunder Spirit flinched at her touch. The realization crystallized her resolve. This wasn't just about her safety anymore, or even her bond with the horse. It was about standing against a systematic cruelty that crushed spirits, human and animal alike, for profit and power. 2 nights before the festival, a final planning meeting was held in Eleanor's spacious living room. Maps of the festival grounds were spread across antique tables, schedules annotated with precise timing for maximum impact. Eduardo Vasquez had prepared emergency legal paperwork should anything go wrong. "Once this starts, there's no going back," Eleanor warned the group. "Whitaker won't just be embarrassed. He'll be furious. He'll look for someone to blame." Maria stood by the window, watching darkness settle over the Kentucky hills. The fear that had paralyzed her days ago had transformed into something harder, more determined. "I'll do it," she said, turning to face the room. "But on one condition. We protect everyone involved, not just me. The workers, the horses, everyone." Eleanor nodded solemnly. That's always been the plan. On the eve of the festival, Maria slipped into Thunder Spirit's stall one last time. The stallion stood listlessly in the corner, his once bright eyes clouded from whatever medications they'd been administering. She sat beside him on the straw, guitar in hand, and began to play the first song she had ever shared with him, a lullaby of mountains and home. Slowly, painfully, Thunder Spirit's ears swiveled toward the sound. A flicker of recognition passed through his dulled eyes. He took one hesitant step toward her, then another, until his muzzle rested against her shoulder. "Mañana termina todo esto," Maria promised, her voice breaking with emotion. "Seremos libres, te lo prometo." "Tomorrow this all ends. We will be free. I promise you." When she returned to her cabin, a small envelope had been slipped under her door. Inside was a bus ticket to Mexico City and a brief note. "Go while you can." Maria stared at the ticket, turning it over in her hands as the weight of choice pressed upon her, the safety of flight against the risk of standing her ground. In that moment of decision, she understood that this festival would not merely determine her own fate, but would become a statement about the very nature of power and resistance, about whose voices deserved to be heard, and whose suffering mattered in a world built on carefully maintained inequalities. Maria stared at the bus ticket, turning it over in her hands as the weight of choice pressed upon her, the safety of flight against the risk of standing her ground. The worn paper represented an escape, a return to the familiar mountains of Oaxaca, to her family who had not seen her face in 5 years, but it also meant surrender. She placed the ticket and note carefully under her thin mattress and stepped outside, needing air to clear her mind. The Kentucky night enveloped her, so different from the Mexican nights of her childhood, yet beautiful in its own way. Stars scattered across the dark canvas, and the scent of bluegrass carried on the gentle breeze. Dawn broke over Silver Creek Farm with unusual activity. Trucks arrived carrying equipment for the festival, temporary grandstands, decorative flower arrangements, sound systems. Workers scurried across the manicured grounds under the watchful eye of Whitaker's event coordinator, a thin woman with a clipboard and permanent frown. Maria moved through her morning chores mechanically, her mind fixed on tomorrow's festival. From the corner of her eye, she observed Thunder Spirit being led from his stall for morning exercise. The stallion moved with uncharacteristic docility, his head lowered, steps faltering. This wasn't submission, it was surrender. Something in his eyes had dimmed, like a light slowly being extinguished. "What did they give him?" she whispered to Sophie when they crossed paths near the feed room. Sophie's eyes darted nervously before she answered. "Dad says it's a cocktail. Tranquilizers mixed with performance enhancers. Keeps him manageable but responsive enough for show." "It's destroying him," Maria said, her voice cracking. "Look at his eyes." Later that morning, Gregory Reynolds arrived, the famous equestrian presenter Whitaker had hired to guide Maria's preparation. Tall and tanned, with artificially whitened teeth and a television-ready smile, he greeted the stable staff with practiced charm before cornering Maria near the tack room. "So you're the miracle worker," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Whitaker tells me you've got some special connection with our problem horse." Maria kept her expression neutral. Thunder Spirit is not a problem. He was hurt by people he should have been able to trust. Gregory's smile tightened. Let me give you some professional advice, sweetheart. Horses aren't people. They don't have feelings to hurt. They respond to dominance and consistency. Is that what you'll show tomorrow? Maria asked carefully. Tomorrow, he replied, leaning closer. I'll show everyone that Thunder Spirit needs a firm hand, not whatever mystical Mexican horse whispering you've been doing. Your job is to stand there and look pretty while I demonstrate proper handling techniques. When Gregory walked away, Carl appeared from around the corner, his weathered face grim. Heard all that, did you? He asked quietly. Maria nodded, unable to speak through her anger. Keep your head, Carl advised. Whitaker wants you to lose your temper, to give him reason to remove you before tomorrow. Throughout the day, Maria watched from a distance as Gregory worked with Thunder Spirit in the main arena. The methods were textbook traditional: strong bits, tight reins, spurs when necessary. Thunder Spirit complied, but something essential had vanished from his bearing. The proud stallion who had once challenged the world now moved like an automaton, eyes vacant, responses mechanical. From her hiding place behind stacked hay bales, Sophie filmed everything, her young face set with determination despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. The footage would join dozens of other clips already collected, a digital record of systematic cruelty disguised as training. By late afternoon, Maria couldn't bear to watch anymore. She retreated to the workers' cabin, burying her face in her hands. The bus ticket seemed to call to her from beneath the mattress, a siren song of safety and surrender. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, Eleanor Harrington stood there, looking out of place in her elegant riding clothes against the weathered cabin. "May I come in?" she asked gently. Inside the cramped space, Eleanor seemed to absorb everything: the stacked bunks, the shared clothing hooks, the single bathroom for 6 adults. She sat carefully on the edge of Maria's bed. "I wanted to check if you're still with us," she said directly. "I saw the bus ticket on your nightstand." Maria flushed. "Someone left it for me. A warning, I think, or a suggestion." Eleanor nodded. "It would be the safer choice, certainly." "What would you do?" Maria asked suddenly. "If you were me?" The older woman considered this carefully. "I've never been in your position, so it would be presumptuous to say. But I know what I admire, and that's someone who understands when a fight is about more than themselves." She reached into her bag and withdrew a small folder. "Eduardo has prepared these documents, a petition for specialized skills visa. When we succeed tomorrow, these will be filed immediately." Maria took the folder with trembling hands. Legal papers, a chance at legitimacy after years of shadows. "Get some rest," Eleanor advised, standing to leave. "Tomorrow we'll demand everything from both you and Thunder Spirit." That evening, Maria found Frank examining Thunder Spirit in his stall. The veterinarian's face was drawn with professional concern and personal guilt. "His heart rate is elevated," Frank muttered, more to himself than to her. "Pupils dilated. I don't like this combination of drugs. It's dangerous." "Then stop giving them to him," Maria said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Frank looked up, startled to find her there. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple," she countered. "You took an oath to prevent suffering." The words struck home. Frank's professional facade cracked, revealing the conflict beneath. "If I refuse, Whitaker will find someone else who won't hesitate. At least I'm monitoring the dosages, keeping them as low as possible." Maria stepped into the stall, approaching Thunder Spirit with gentle movements. The stallion acknowledged her with the barest flick of an ear, a shadow of his usual greeting. "What happens when he's in the arena tomorrow?" she asked. "With the crowds, the noise?" Frank couldn't meet her eyes. "The stimulants should counteract the sedatives by then. He'll be responsive." "You mean agitated, unpredictable?" Maria stroked Thunder Spirit's neck, feeling the unnatural heat beneath his skin. Exactly what Whitaker wants to prove his point. After Frank left, Maria remained with Thunder Spirit, applying cooling compresses to his neck and flanks, singing softly as she worked. The herbs she had carefully cultivated might help counteract some effects of the drugs: aloe for inflammation, chamomile for anxiety, mint to stimulate natural awareness. "Mañana es importante," she whispered against his ear. "Need you to remember who you really are, beneath all these chemicals." Throughout the night, a rotation of allies checked on Thunder Spirit. Ramon brought fresh water with electrolytes mixed in. Sophie smuggled in special feed that her research suggested might help metabolize the drugs faster. Bobby, on night watch, conveniently forgot to administer the evening dose of tranquilizers, recording in the log that it had been given. The morning of the festival dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself had conspired to create a perfect backdrop for Whitaker's political coming out. Silver Creek Farm transformed into a showcase of wealth and power. White tents with golden pennants, uniformed staff directing luxury vehicles to designated parking areas, caterers arranging elaborate displays of food and drink. Maria was summoned to the main house, where a stiff uniform awaited her. Navy blue with gold piping, the Silver Creek logo emblazoned on the breast pocket. The clothing, clearly designed for a male stable hand, hung awkwardly on her small frame. "Mr. Whitaker wants everyone looking professional today," explained the house manager, a pinched woman who barely concealed her disdain for stable staff. In the preparation area behind the main arena, Maria found Thunder Spirit already being readied by Gregory and 2 assistants. The stallion stood unnaturally still as they attached the ornate saddle and bridle, equipment far more elaborate than necessary, designed to impress rather than comfort. "There she is," Gregory announced with artificial cheer, "our star attraction." Maria approached slowly, her heart breaking at the dullness in Thunder Spirit's usually expressive eyes. His coat had been brushed to a high shine, but beneath the gleaming surface, she could sense his confusion and distress. "You'll enter from the east gate when announced," Gregory instructed, his voice taking on the condescending tone he seemed to reserve for her. "Walk to center ring, then I'll take over from there." "What exactly is supposed to happen?" Maria asked, needing to understand the script Whitaker had planned. Gregory's smile turned cold. "You'll demonstrate your special connection with this dangerous animal. He'll inevitably act up because of the crowd and noise. I'll step in to show proper control techniques. The audience will appreciate the contrast between sentimental methods and professional handling." He patted Thunder Spirit's neck possessively. Simple storytelling, the kind audiences and voters love. When Gregory turned to speak with his assistants, Maria leaned close to Thunder Spirit's ear. "Remember who you are," she whispered urgently. "Remember who we are together." For a flickering instant, something awakened in the stallion's eyes. A spark of recognition quickly submerged beneath the fog of medication. Whitaker arrived an hour before the show, resplendent in a custom Western suit and polished boots. He inspected the preparations with the air of a general reviewing troops before battle. "Everyone clear on today's program?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. His eyes lingered on Maria with undisguised contempt. "No surprises, no deviations. This is about showcasing Silver Creek's commitment to excellence and tradition." He gathered the staff for final instructions, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "Today isn't just about horses. It's about values, about showing Kentucky what real leadership looks like. Discipline, authority, natural order." His gaze swept the assembled workers, lingering meaningfully on the Latino staff. Some animals, like some people, need to learn their place in the hierarchy. Today's demonstration will make that lesson clear. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as he dismissed them to their positions. Maria felt a chill despite the warm spring day. The mask had slipped, revealing the true purpose behind today's spectacle. Not just promoting Whitaker's political ambitions, but reinforcing a worldview where power justified any means of control. As the grandstands filled with Kentucky's elite, politicians, business leaders, old money families, Maria remained with Thunder Spirit in the preparation area. Through a gap in the decorative paneling, she could see Eleanor Harrington seated prominently in the second row, surrounded by journalists and animal welfare advocates strategically placed throughout the audience. Sophie slipped briefly into the preparation area, her face flushed with excitement and fear. "Everything's ready," she whispered. "The technical team has the videos queued up." Mom positioned journalists from 3 different papers near the main screen. "What if something goes wrong?" Maria asked, the weight of responsibility suddenly overwhelming. Sophie squeezed her hand quickly. "Dad says the drugs should be wearing off. Thunder Spirit might be confused, but he'll recognize you." As she left, Sophie added, "Just remember, when it all starts happening, get to the center of the arena and stay there. That's where all cameras will focus." Minutes later, the announcer's voice boomed across the property. "Ladies and gentlemen, Silver Creek Farm proudly presents a special demonstration of equine rehabilitation, the remarkable story of Thunder Spirit." Maria led the stallion toward the entrance gate, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if others could hear it. Thunder Spirit moved with uncharacteristic hesitation, his eyes darting nervously at the sounds and movements around them. "Confia en me," she whispered, placing her hand gently on his neck. "Trust me as I trust you." "Confia en me," she whispered, placing her hand gently on his neck. "Trust me as I trust you." The arena of Silver Creek Farm had transformed into a spectacle of American opulence. White tents with gold trim billowed gently in the spring breeze. The pristine grandstands, hastily constructed but immaculate, were filled with Kentucky's elite, men in tailored suits and women in pastel dresses, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. American flags fluttered from every post, their crisp red, white, and blue a stark contrast to the emerald pastures beyond. Maria drew a deep breath as the announcer's voice boomed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Thunder Spirit, the extraordinary thoroughbred whose remarkable journey exemplifies Silver Creek's commitment to excellence and tradition." The heavy gate swung open and Maria guided Thunder Spirit forward. The sudden wall of sound, applause, murmurs, the brass band playing a stirring country anthem, hit them like a physical force. The stallion's muscles tensed beneath her hand, his stride faltering as his drugged senses struggled to process the overwhelming stimuli. Maria could feel his confusion radiating through every fiber of his being. His ears swiveled frantically, trying to locate familiar reference points in the chaos. His breathing quickened, nostrils flaring as the medications in his system created a disorienting conflict. Part of him dulled and compliant, another part increasingly agitated as the stimulants took hold. In the center ring, Whitaker stood with a cluster of political figures, his smile gleaming as bright as the silver on his custom belt buckle. He nodded approvingly as cameras flashed, capturing the moment for campaign materials yet to come. Behind him, Gregory Reynolds waited with the practiced patience of a predator, crop tucked casually under his arm. Thunder Spirit's steps grew increasingly erratic as they approached the center. The conflicting drugs were creating exactly the effect Whitaker had planned, a horse on the edge of control, vulnerable to any trigger. Maria could feel his heart racing beneath her palm, his skin hot and damp with sweat not caused by exertion, but by chemical chaos. In the VIP section, she spotted Eleanor Harrington, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, her posture alert but outwardly relaxed. Beside her sat journalists from major publications, their programs open on their laps, pens poised. Sophie and her friends were positioned strategically near the media booth, their young faces tight with anticipation. When they reached the center of the arena, Thunder Spirit began to circle anxiously, his movements growing more agitated with each passing second. The crowd's energy seemed to press in on him from all sides, and Maria could see the moment approaching, the inevitable breakdown Whitaker had engineered. "You see how unstable this animal still is," Whitaker's voice carried through the speaker system as he addressed the crowd with practiced concern. "Despite months of rehabilitation, some damage runs too deep." Thunder Spirit's ears flattened against his skull, his eyes rolling to show the whites, the universal equine signal of distress. The audience shifted uncomfortably, some pulling children closer as the stallion's agitation became more apparent. Gregory stepped forward, reaching for the lead rope with a confident smile. "Let me take over from here," he said loudly enough for the front rows to hear. "Some animals require a firmer approach." It was the moment of decision. Maria could see the trap closing around them precisely as Whitaker had designed. Thunder Spirit was seconds away from the explosive reaction that would justify the brutal methods waiting to be demonstrated. Instead of handing over the rope, Maria did something no one expected. With deliberate calmness, she removed the decorative bridle from Thunder Spirit's head and let it fall to the ground. Then, with the entire arena watching in stunned silence, she simply stepped away from the agitated stallion. "What is she doing?" The whispers rippled through the crowd as Maria stood alone, separated from the increasingly distressed horse. Thunder Spirit, suddenly free of physical restraint, grew even more agitated, moving in tight, panicked circles as the crowd's murmurs swelled. Gregory lunged forward to grab him, but Maria raised her hand in a gesture so commanding that he hesitated. And then, in the tense silence that followed, Maria began to sing. Her voice rose clear and melodious, carrying the simple notes of the Mexican lullaby she had first sung to Thunder Spirit months ago. The sound cut through the noise of the crowd, through the chemical haze clouding the stallion's mind, reaching for the connection they had built together. For several heartbeats, nothing changed. Thunder Spirit continued his anxious circling, and Maria continued singing, her eyes never leaving his. Then, gradually, his ears began to swivel toward her voice. His circling slowed, each revolution bringing him closer to where she stood. The crowd fell utterly silent, collectively holding their breath, as they witnessed something few had ever seen: communication transcending species, a language of trust cutting through fear. "That's not possible," someone whispered loudly enough to be heard in the hushed arena. That horse was deemed untrainable. As Maria's song continued, her voice growing stronger with each note, Thunder Spirit's demeanor transformed. His head lowered, not in submission, but in recognition. His breathing slowed. He took one step toward her, then another, until he stood before her, his massive head level with her heart. Maria reached out slowly, her hand touching his forehead in a gesture of connection rather than control. The moment hung suspended in time, the young immigrant and the traumatized champion finding sanctuary in each other amidst the machinery of power designed to separate them. In the VIP section, Eleanor Harrington nodded almost imperceptibly. Instantly, the massive screens positioned around the arena flickered to life. The footage was devastating in its clarity. Thunder Spirit being whipped during training sessions, deprived of water as punishment, handlers jabbing him with electric prods under Whitaker's explicit direction. Each clip was time-stamped, the Silver Creek logo visible in the background, Whitaker's voice clearly audible giving the orders. A collective gasp rose from the audience. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, capturing both the screens and the contrasting image in the center ring, Maria and Thunder Spirit, connected through trust rather than fear. "Turn those off," Whitaker's voice bellowed as he realized what was happening. He stormed toward the media booth, but security guards, quietly replaced earlier with Eleanor's people, stepped in his path. The screens continued their damning slideshow, images of immigrant workers sleeping in overcrowded conditions, documentation of wage theft, and finally, the recorded conversation of Whitaker threatening Maria with deportation if she didn't abandon Thunder Spirit. In the center of the arena, oblivious to the chaos erupting around them, Maria continued her quiet communion with Thunder Spirit. The stallion had completely calmed now, his eyes half closed as she stroked his neck, his massive body relaxed despite the surrounding tumult. Whitaker, his face contorted with rage, broke free from the security guards and charged toward the ring. "You'll pay for this, you stupid Mexican," he shouted, pulling the riding crop from his belt as he approached. What happened next would be described in different ways by different witnesses, but all would agree on its extraordinary nature. Without any visible command from Maria, Thunder Spirit shifted his position, placing his massive body directly between her and the advancing Whitaker. The stallion made no aggressive move, no rearing, no striking with hooves. He simply became an immovable barrier. his dark eyes fixed on the man who had caused so much suffering. Whitaker attempted to circle around, the crop still raised threateningly. Thunder Spirit moved in perfect synchrony, maintaining the protective position. Again and again, the powerful businessman tried to reach Maria, and each time, the horse anticipated and blocked his path. The absurdity of the situation gradually became apparent to the audience, one of Kentucky's most influential men being thwarted by the silent strategy of the very animal he had abused. Uncomfortable titters grew into outright laughter as Whitaker's face flushed with humiliation. "Mr. Whitaker." Eleanor Harrington's voice cut through the spectacle as she approached the ring, flanked by security personnel. "I believe it would be best if you stepped away now." "This is my property," Whitaker sputtered, gesturing wildly with the crop. "My event." "Actually," Eleanor replied calmly, "as of this morning, the ownership situation has become rather complicated." She nodded toward a group of suited individuals entering the arena, representatives from the bank that held Silver Creek's considerable mortgages. Financial irregularities have been discovered that require immediate attention. Security guards, no longer Whitaker's employees, stepped forward to escort him from the arena. The crowd, sensing the dramatic shift in power, began to disperse, moving toward the exits in murmuring groups, phones still recording every moment of the unfolding scandal. Eleanor turned to address the remaining audience. "The presentation will continue," she announced with quiet authority. "But now we'll see the true spirit of Thunder Spirit, liberated through compassion, not fear." In the center of the ring, Maria had mounted Thunder Spirit bareback, using only the lightest touch to guide him. Together they began a demonstration that left even experienced horsemen speechless, complex movements executed with minimal cues, harmony born of mutual respect rather than dominance. As they moved as one around the arena, Maria bent close to Thunder Spirit's ear. "We did it," she whispered. Her words meant only for him. "We showed them there's another way." The stallion's ears flicked back at the sound of her voice, then forward again with renewed confidence. His stride lengthened, powerful and proud, no longer the movement of a broken animal, but of one who had found his way back to his true nature. From the edge of the ring, Carl watched with undisguised emotion. "In 30 years working with horses," he murmured to Sophie, "I've never seen anything like it." His weathered face reflected wonder as Maria and Thunder Spirit completed a flawless series of movements that required absolute trust between horse and rider. Then his expression shifted, darkening with concern as he noticed Whitaker breaking away from his escorts, reaching inside his jacket with deliberate menace. The fallen magnate's eyes burned with a hatred that transcended the day's humiliation, fixed on the young woman who had become the catalyst for his downfall. In that moment, Carl understood with chilling clarity that Whitaker would not accept defeat. Not from an immigrant, not from a horse, not from anyone who challenged the order of his world. Carl spotted Whitaker's hand reaching inside his jacket, his face contorted with a rage that transcended the day's humiliation. In that split second, the weathered stable manager lunged forward, catching Whitaker's wrist just as his fingers closed around what Carl later discovered was a small revolver. "That's enough, Jeremiah," Carl growled, twisting the man's arm behind his back with surprising strength. "You've lost. Don't make it worse." 2 security guards immediately flanked them, taking control of the struggling Whitaker, who continued to spew threats even as they escorted him firmly toward the exit. "This isn't over!" Whitaker shouted, his carefully cultivated public persona shattered beyond repair. "That horse is my property! That Mexican is nothing! She's invisible!" His voice echoed across the now hushed arena, where Maria and Thunder Spirit remained in the center ring, a tableau of dignity against Whitaker's disintegration. The stallion's ears flicked toward the commotion, his body tensing slightly, but he remained grounded by Maria's calm presence, her hand steady on his neck. Eleanor Harrington stepped forward, taking control of the situation with practiced grace. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disruption. Perhaps this is a good moment to adjourn for refreshments. The demonstration will continue in 30 minutes. As the remaining audience members moved toward the reception area, cameras continued to roll, capturing the extraordinary contrast between Whitaker's meltdown and the composed partnership at the center of the ring. Journalists hurried toward their laptops and phones, racing to break the story that was unfolding, a tale of animal cruelty, labor exploitation, and the dramatic downfall of a would-be political contender. Maria dismounted slowly, keeping one hand on Thunderspirit's shoulder as she processed what had just happened. The stallion remained close, occasionally nudging her with his muzzle, as if checking that she was unharmed. "You protected me," she whispered to him in Spanish, resting her forehead against his. "Just as I protected you." Eleanor approached them, her composure slightly ruffled, but her eyes bright with vindication. "Are you all right?" she asked Maria. "Yes," Maria answered, straightening her shoulders. "What happens now?" "Now," Eleanor said with a small, satisfied smile, "Whitaker faces some very uncomfortable questions from very important people. The evidence is overwhelming, Maria. Not just the animal cruelty, but labor violations, possible financial fraud, and that little display of attempting to bring a weapon into a public event." Thunderspirit shifted nervously at the cluster of people gathering around them. Sophie, Carl, Ramon, and several others from their improvised resistance network. The stallion's eyes darted between unfamiliar faces, his trust clearly extending to Maria, but remaining tentative with others. "He needs space," Maria said quietly, noting the subtle signs of the stallion's growing anxiety, the tightening around his eyes, the slight elevation of his head. Even in victory, she remained attuned to his emotional state, prioritizing his well-being over the celebration. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Journalists requested interviews, which Eleanor tactfully deflected until Maria could have proper legal representation present. Animal welfare officials arrived to document Thunderspirit's condition and take formal statements about his treatment. Eduardo Vasquez, the immigration attorney, consulted quietly with Maria in a corner of the stable office, explaining the process for her specialized skills visa application. By late afternoon, the festival had transformed into something entirely different from Whitaker's planned political launching pad. Small groups toured the stables, now focused on learning about humane training methods rather than admiring displays of wealth and power. Sophie and her friends conducted impromptu educational sessions, showing videos of Maria's gentle approach contrasted with traditional methods. Thunderspirit, returned to his stall for some much-needed quiet, remained unsettled. The day's events, the drug still leaving his system, the overwhelming sensory experience of the arena, the confrontation, had taken their toll. He paced restlessly, occasionally pausing to stare at the stall door as if expecting another threat to materialize. Maria sat cross-legged in the clean straw, giving him space while remaining present. "It's over," she murmured, not reaching for him but allowing him to process in his own way. "No more tricks, no more cruelty." Gradually, the stallion's circuits of the stall brought him closer to where she sat. His breathing deepened, the rhythm of his movement slowed. When he finally lowered his head to her level, blowing softly against her hair, Maria felt the tension in her own body release. Later that evening, as the last visitors departed and the farm settled into an exhausted quiet, Carl found Maria still with Thunderspirit, gently applying a poultice to areas where the ornate festival tack had rubbed his skin raw. "You did something remarkable today," he said, leaning against the stall door. "Changed more than just that horse's fate." Maria glanced up, surprised by the open admiration in the usually taciturn manager's voice. "I just showed what was already there," she replied, her hand steady on Thunderspirit's flank. "His spirit, his intelligence, his capacity to heal." "And yours," Carl added quietly. The news spread rapidly beyond Kentucky's horse country. By the following morning, video clips of Maria and Thunderspirit had gone viral. The young Mexican immigrant singing to calm the agitated stallion, the horse positioning himself protectively between her and Whitaker, the stunning display of partnership that followed. Major networks picked up the story, framing it as a David and Goliath tale of compassion triumphing over cruelty. At Silver Creek Farm, the atmosphere had transformed overnight. The remaining staff moved with lighter steps, speaking more freely, standing straighter. Ramon organized an impromptu celebration in the workers' quarters, traditional Mexican dishes appearing alongside American potluck staples. Barriers of nationality and position temporarily dissolved in the wake of shared victory. Maria found herself the reluctant center of attention, uncomfortable with praise but gradually accepting that her story had meaning beyond her personal journey. When a reporter from a Spanish-language network approached her near the stables, Elena standing supportively nearby, Maria agreed to her first formal interview. "Your methods with Thunder Spirit challenge everything the traditional horse training world believes," the reporter said. "Where did you learn this approach?" Maria thought of her grandmother, of nights under Mexican stars, listening to stories of animal spirits and human responsibility. "I didn't learn it from any book," she answered honestly. "I learned by listening to the horse, not just trying to make him listen to me." As clips of the interview circulated, training facilities across the country began calling Eleanor, requesting demonstrations or workshops. Requests for Maria's techniques flooded social media channels. What had begun as one woman's connection with one traumatized horse was evolving into a potential revolution in equine training philosophy. 3 days after the festival, Whitaker made one last, desperate attempt to salvage what he could. His luxury SUV appeared at the farm's entrance just before sunset, when most workers had departed. He found Maria in the training paddock, working quietly with Thunder Spirit on basic liberty exercises, communication without physical contact. The stallion noticed Whitaker first, his head shooting up, ears pricked forward in alert recognition. Maria turned to see her former employer approaching, his appearance markedly different. The polish gone, replaced by a haggard face and rumpled clothing. "You've won, I suppose," Whitaker said without preamble, his voice lacking its usual authority. "The bank's foreclosing, my investors have pulled out, and the party's asking me to withdraw my candidacy announcement." Maria remained silent, one hand resting lightly on Thunder Spirit's shoulder. $1 million for the horse," Whitaker said abruptly. "Cash, no questions asked. You can send it to your family, buy a house, whatever you want." The offer hung in the air between them. A year ago, even a month ago, such an amount would have seemed impossible to Maria, enough to transform her family's circumstances completely. She studied Whitaker's face, seeing not power now but desperation, a man trying to salvage something, anything, from his collapse. Thunder Spirit shifted slightly, pressing against her side as if sensing the importance of the moment. His eyes, once wild with fear and rage, now held a steady confidence that came from knowing his worth was not measured in dollars. "He is not for sale," Maria said simply. "He never was." Whitaker's face hardened. "Everything has a price." "No, senor," Maria replied, her voice gentle but firm. "That is what you never understood. The most valuable things cannot be bought or sold." As Whitaker turned to leave, defeated in this final attempt, Maria felt a strange sense of pity for the man. For all his wealth and power, he had never experienced the one thing she and Thunder Spirit had found together: trust freely given, without coercion or calculation. The following week brought transformative changes to Silver Creek Farm. Eleanor Harrington, working with a consortium of ethical investors, acquired majority ownership of the property. At her first meeting with the staff, she outlined her vision: converting the facility into the Kentucky Equine Recovery Center, specializing in rehabilitating traumatized horses using the humane methods pioneered by Maria. "This will be a place of healing," Eleanor announced, "not just for horses but for people too, where methods of communication replace methods of control." Maria, seated beside her with Eduardo Vasquez, listened with growing wonder as Eleanor detailed the next phase: sponsoring Maria's specialized skills visa, creating a formal position for her as training director, and eventually bringing her family from Mexico legally once her status was secured. When Whitaker left Silver Creek Farm for the final time, driving slowly past the pristine white fences and emerald pastures he had once ruled like a feudal lord, his empire had already begun its transformation into something he could never have imagined: a sanctuary where broken beings, both human and equine, could rediscover their inherent value beyond the metrics of profit and performance. 6 months transformed Silver Creek Farm beyond recognition. The pristine white sign at the entrance now read, Kentucky Equine Recovery Center, in elegant navy letters, with a simple silhouette of a horse and human standing side by side as its emblem. Where Whitaker's imposing gates once stood, a simple wooden archway welcomed visitors, hung with flowering vines that softened the transition from outside world to sanctuary. Maria stood on the porch of her new home, a modest 2-bedroom cottage at the eastern edge of the property, watching the morning mist rise from the pastures. She cradled a mug of coffee between her palms, savoring the quiet moment before her day began. The cottage still felt surreal, with its solid walls and windows that actually sealed against the Kentucky winter, so different from the drafty workers' cabin she'd inhabited for years. Inside, sounds of life stirred. Her mother preparing breakfast, her youngest brother Pablo arguing good-naturedly with their middle brother Miguel about whose turn it was to feed the chickens they kept behind the house. Their voices in Spanish, unrestrained and unafraid, filled the space with a warmth Maria had almost forgotten was possible. 3 months ago they had arrived from Oaxaca, stepping off the plane with wide eyes and clutching small bags containing everything they owned. The specialized skills visa Eleanor had helped secure for Maria extended protection to her immediate family, creating a pathway to legal residency that had once seemed an impossible dream. Her mother had wept when she first saw the cottage, running her weathered hands over the smooth countertops in the kitchen, opening and closing the refrigerator door in wonder. Dios mío, she had whispered. All this for us? Now Mama was already establishing herself as a force in the center's operations, her knowledge of traditional plant medicine supplementing the veterinary care. Where Frank had once relied exclusively on pharmaceutical interventions, he now consulted regularly with Senora Rodriguez about herbal alternatives for anxiety, inflammation, and digestive issues in their equine patients. Maria's reverie broke as her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. New arrival coming at 9. Severe trauma case. Your expertise needed. Since the center's founding, Maria's role had evolved far beyond what she could have imagined. As director of rehabilitation training, she oversaw the care of horses others had deemed beyond saving. Animals bearing scars both visible and invisible, whose trust in humans had been systematically destroyed. I'm leaving now, Mama, she called, stepping back inside to place her mug in the sink. New horse coming today. Her mother appeared from the bedroom, tucking a strand of silver-streaked hair into her braid. The herbs I prepared are on the counter. The lavender oil, too, for your hands, so he will know your scent is safe. Maria smiled, touched by her mother's intuitive understanding of her work. She gathered the small bundles of dried plants, inhaling their familiar scents, connections to her grandmother's wisdom that now found new purpose in this Kentucky sanctuary. The center's main complex stood where Silver Creek's showcase stables had once dominated the landscape. The original structure remained, but renovations had transformed the interior. Stalls twice the previous size, windows allowing natural light, innovative designs that permitted horses to see and interact with each other safely. What had changed most dramatically, however, was the staff. Many of the original workers had stayed on, now employed with proper documentation, fair wages, and housing that reflected their dignity as skilled professionals. Ramon served as operations manager, overseeing the daily functioning of the center with quiet efficiency. Carl had stayed too, his decades of experience invaluable, though he'd initially been uncomfortable with the shifting power dynamics. You're the boss now, he'd told Maria gruffly in those early days, struggling to adjust to taking direction from someone he'd once supervised. No, Carl, she'd responded gently. We're partners. Different knowledge, same goals. By the time Maria reached the reception area, a small crowd had gathered. Eleanor, Frank, and Sophie, 2 rehabilitation specialists, and several interns from the university's equine program. Through the large windows, she could see the trailer arriving, its cautious pace suggesting the fragility of its cargo. What do we know? Maria asked, accepting the clipboard Eleanor handed her. 6-year-old Andalusian gelding, Frank replied, scrolling through his tablet. Performing horse from a touring show, developed severe aggression after an accident during a performance. Current owners couldn't handle him, were going to euthanize. Maria nodded, scanning the medical history. The familiar pattern emerged, a traumatic incident, followed by harsh correction methods that only deepened the horse's psychological damage, creating a cycle of fear and aggression that owners interpreted as deliberate defiance rather than desperate self-protection. "Let's give him space first," she instructed the team. "No approach until he's had time to assess his surroundings. Sophie, make sure the quiet stall is prepared, the one with the view of the meadow." As the trailer doors opened, two handlers struggled with a heavily sedated horse. Even through the drug-induced haze, the animal's terror was evident. Whites of his eyes showing, nostrils flared, every muscle tense despite the chemical restraint. Maria stayed back, observing. The Andalusian was beautiful despite his poor condition. Once powerful muscles now atrophied, coat dull from stress and inadequate nutrition, a long scar running across his right shoulder. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, darting frantically, seeing threats in every shadow, every movement. "Just like you," she whispered to Thunder Spirit, who stood calmly beside her, his presence at these arrivals now a standard part of their protocol. In the 6 months since Whitaker's departure, Thunder Spirit had undergone his own remarkable transformation. His coat gleamed with health, his eyes clear and confident. The physical scars remained, but the psychological ones had begun to heal through purpose. He had become an essential part of their rehabilitation program, a living example to both humans and horses that recovery was possible. Once the new arrival was settled in his stall, Maria implemented the protocol they had developed: 24 hours of minimal human contact, regular meals appearing without confrontation, soft music playing at intervals, and time to decompress from the stress of transport and strange surroundings. That evening, she returned alone, carrying only her guitar. She sat outside the stall, not looking directly at the nervous Andalusian, and began to play softly. The melody, one her grandmother had taught her for calming frightened animals, filled the quiet barn with gentle notes that asked nothing, demanded nothing. "My name is Maria," she said simply in Spanish between songs, her voice low and steady. "Tomorrow I will tell you my story. Perhaps later, you will tell me yours." For 3 days, this became their routine. Maria appearing at dawn and dusk, sometimes playing music, sometimes reading aloud from whatever book she was enjoying, sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence. She never approached the stall door, never attempted touch, never even looked directly at the traumatized horse. On the 4th morning, she arrived to find the Andalusian standing near the door rather than huddled in the back corner. His head remained low, but his ears flicked forward when she settled into her usual spot. "Today I brought something different," she told him, unwrapping a bundle of fresh herbs, mint, lavender, and chamomile from her mother's garden. She placed them outside the stall within reach if he chose to investigate. "These are from my home. In Mexico, my abuela taught me that plants speak a language older than words." She began softly recounting stories of her childhood in Oaxaca, the mountains that cradled her village, the traditions passed through generations of women in her family, the connection to animals that had seemed so natural until she encountered the industrialized approach to horses in America. The Andalusian's curiosity gradually overcame his fear. By the time Maria finished her story, he had stretched his neck to sniff the herbs, drawing their scent deep into his nostrils, processing this offering on levels beyond human understanding. Progress continued in small, meaningful increments. By the 3rd week, Maria could sit inside the stall at a respectful distance. By the 5th week, the Andalusian, now named Alma Nueva, or New Soul by the Spanish-speaking staff, would approach for brief moments of contact, his trust building in a natural rhythm that couldn't be rushed or forced. Throughout this process, Thunder Spirit played a remarkable role. Maria would bring him to the adjacent paddock where Alma Nueva could observe their interactions, seeing another horse who had survived trauma now engaging willingly, even joyfully, with humans. Thunder Spirit seemed to understand his purpose. displaying extraordinary patience and gentleness that belied his once fierce reputation. Word of the center's success spread rapidly throughout the equestrian world. Owners began bringing their problem horses from across the country, willing to pay premium fees for rehabilitation rather than resorting to euthanasia for valuable animals. Each success story built upon the last, creating a reputation that attracted both clients and students eager to learn Maria's methods. The university established an official partnership, sending veterinary and equine management students for internships. Frank, initially skeptical of approaches he considered unscientific, now co-taught workshops on integrating traditional medicine with modern veterinary practice, his daughter Sophie serving as his enthusiastic teaching assistant. 6 months into the center's operation, Eleanor organized an open house to showcase their work to the wider community. Local families, horse enthusiasts, potential donors, and media representatives wandered the beautifully renovated facilities, observing demonstrations of rehabilitation techniques and hearing the stories behind the horses in their care. Maria led Thunder Spirit through a Liberty demonstration, horse and handler moving in perfect harmony without physical connection, their communication so subtle that it appeared magical to untrained eyes. The crowd applauded as the powerful stallion executed complex movements with fluid grace, his focus never wavering from Maria despite the audience. That horse sent 3 men to the hospital before she worked with him, Carl explained to a group of wide-eyed visitors. Deemed dangerous, headed for slaughter. Now look at him. Later that afternoon, as the event wound down, Maria found a moment of quiet with Thunder Spirit in their favorite spot, a hilltop overlooking the entire property. The late autumn sun bathed the landscape in golden light, illuminating the transformation that had occurred not just in the buildings and grounds, but in the very spirit of the place. Below them, she could see her mother conducting a workshop on medicinal herbs, gesturing expressively to an attentive group. Nearby, Ramon led a tour for potential donors, his posture confident as he explained the center's mission in the fluent English he'd been studying diligently. Even Carl appeared more relaxed, laughing with a group of interns as they groomed the newest arrivals. "We did this," Maria whispered to Thunder Spirit, resting her hand on his powerful neck. "Together." The stallion turned his head to regard her, his eyes reflecting intelligence and something deeper, a wordless understanding that transcended the barriers between species. In that moment, Maria realized that their healing had been mutual, each broken spirit helping to mend the other, creating something stronger at the fractured places. As twilight settled over Kentucky, Maria mounted Thunder Spirit bareback, using only a simple rope halter. Together they rode down the hillside toward the lights of the center that now shimmered in the gathering dusk, 2 beings who had found, against all odds, not just survival but profound meaning in their shared journey from darkness into light. As twilight settled over Kentucky, Maria mounted Thunder Spirit bareback, using only a simple rope halter. Together they rode down the hillside toward the lights of the center that now shimmered in the gathering dusk. 2 beings who had found, against all odds, not just survival but profound meaning in their shared journey from darkness into light. The autumn morning arrived with a crispness that signaled the changing season. Maria sat at her small kitchen table, reviewing the day's schedule when her phone rang. Eleanor's voice carried an unusual note of hesitation. "Maria, there's something you should know. Jack Palmer has applied to our veterans program." The name hung in the air like a physical presence. Jack Palmer, the trainer who had systematically broken Thunder Spirit's body and spirit through methods so cruel that even hardened horsemen spoke of them in hushed tones. "He's part of a group coming next week," Eleanor continued carefully. "Veterans with PTSD. I wanted to give you time to process this before they arrive." Maria's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "Why would he come here? He must know Thunder Spirit is here." "That's exactly why he's coming," Eleanor replied. "He specifically requested our program after seeing the feature in National Geographic. Maria, he was severely injured in Afghanistan after re-enlisting. The man who's coming, he's not the same person who hurt Thunder Spirit." After hanging up, Maria walked to the window, watching as her brothers chased each other through the morning mist. How could she face the man who had inflicted such profound trauma on Thunder Spirit? More importantly, how could she subject the stallion to that encounter? The week passed with a strange tension underlying the center's usual rhythms. Maria found herself watching Thunder Spirit with new eyes, searching for some way to prepare him, or perhaps herself, for the approaching reunion. The stallion, now in his prime at 9 years old, had blossomed into an ambassador for the center's rehabilitation program. His transformation from terrified, aggressive outcast to confident, gentle teacher of both horses and humans represented everything their work stood for. Would seeing him again undo all our progress? She asked Ramon as they watched Thunder Spirit guiding a nervous new mare around the socialization paddock, showing remarkable patience when she startled at shadows. Ramon considered this carefully. I don't think so. Thunder Spirit isn't the same horse Palmer knew. He has you now, a whole community that respects him. His identity isn't defined by trauma anymore. When the van bearing the Veterans for Healing logo pulled into the center's driveway the following Tuesday, Maria stood on the porch of the main building, her heart beating uncomfortably fast. 8 veterans of varying ages emerged, their bodies and faces carrying the visible and invisible marks of war. Among them, leaning heavily on a cane, was Jack Palmer. Maria would have recognized him anywhere despite the changes. The once powerful frame had diminished, his right leg noticeably stiff, angry scars marking the right side of his face. But it was his eyes that showed the most profound transformation, the arrogant confidence replaced by a wary uncertainty that Maria recognized all too well from the traumatized horses they rehabilitated. Welcome to the Kentucky Equine Recovery Center. Eleanor greeted the group warmly. We're honored to have you with us for the next 3 weeks. As Eleanor led the veterans on a tour of the facilities, Maria retreated to her office, needing time to compose herself. She had faced many challenges in building this sanctuary, but none had felt so personally confronting as the prospect of facilitating healing for the man who had caused such suffering. Later that afternoon, Palmer requested to speak with her privately. They sat in the small garden behind the main building, the late autumn flowers providing splashes of color against the approaching winter. I don't know if you remember me, he began, his voice rougher than she recalled. I know who you are, Mr. Palmer, Maria replied simply. He nodded, staring at his hands, scarred, calloused hands that had once wielded whips and chains against Thunder Spirit. I want to explain something, though it's not an excuse. The methods I used on Thunder Spirit and other horses, they were the same ones used on me in military training. Break them down to build them back up. Control through fear. His voice cracked slightly. I never questioned it until... He gestured vaguely at his injured body. IED took out our convoy. While I was recovering, I had a lot of time to think about cycles of violence. How we pass on what was done to us. Maria listened, her face carefully neutral though her emotions churned beneath the surface. Why come here? You must know it will be difficult for everyone. Because I need to face it, Palmer answered simply. And because if there's even a chance that seeing Thunder Spirit again could help me understand how to break this cycle, I have to try. He met her eyes directly. I don't expect forgiveness. From you or the horse. The next morning brought the moment Maria had been simultaneously dreading and preparing for. The veterans would begin their first session with the therapy horses, and Palmer had specifically asked if he might see Thunder Spirit, not to interact, just to observe from a distance. Maria had spent the night in Thunder Spirit's stall, softly explaining what was coming, drawing comfort from the steady rhythm of his breathing. Now, as she led him to the quiet paddock where the encounter would take place, she felt his alertness, his complete trust in her guidance despite sensing her tension. He's just a man now, she whispered in Spanish, more for herself than for Thunder Spirit. Just another broken being looking for healing. The veterans gathered by the fence, Eleanor explaining the principles of their equine therapy program. Thunder Spirit grazed peacefully at the far end of the paddock, occasionally glancing toward the group with mild interest. When Palmer stepped forward, Leaning on his cane, the stallion's head lifted immediately. Everyone held their breath. The recognition was instantaneous and unmistakable. Thunder Spirit's entire body tensed, his ears pricked forward in absolute focus, nostrils flaring as he drew in the scent of the man who had once dominated his world through pain. Palmer stood motionless, emotion washing over his scarred face. "He remembers," he whispered. "Horses never forget," Maria said quietly. "But they don't hold grudges like humans do. They live in the present. It's one of many lessons they have to teach us." For several long moments, horse and man regarded each other across the space. Predator and prey, abuser and victim, now both transformed by their separate journeys through trauma. Then, with deliberate calmness, Maria walked to Thunder Spirit's side, placing her hand gently on his neck, grounding him with her familiar presence. "Would you like to come closer?" she asked Palmer, surprising herself with the offer. Palmer hesitated, clearly shocked by the invitation. "Are you sure that's safe? For him, I mean. I don't want to traumatize him again." The genuine concern in his voice, concern for the horse's well-being rather than his own safety, told Maria more about Palmer's transformation than any words could have. She nodded, and Palmer carefully made his way into the paddock, stopping at a respectful distance. Thunder Spirit watched his approach with alert wariness, but remained steady beside Maria. The other veterans and staff gathered at the fence, witnessing a moment none of them fully understood but all somehow recognized as significant. "I'm sorry," Palmer said, his voice breaking as he addressed the stallion directly. "I'm sorry for everything." What happened next would be described differently by everyone present, yet all would agree on its extraordinary nature. Thunder Spirit, after a long moment of assessment, stepped forward voluntarily. Cautiously, with ears forward and eyes watchful, he approached the man who had once been the source of his greatest suffering. Palmer remained absolutely still, tears streaming down his weathered face. The stallion extended his muzzle and gently blew warm air against Palmer's cheek, the most profound gesture of recognition a horse can offer. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but acknowledgement of Palmer's humanity, of his suffering, of their shared journey through darkness. Later that afternoon, as the formal therapy session began, something unexpected emerged. The veterans, initially awkward and hesitant around the horses, found themselves drawn to Thunder Spirit's quiet strength. They gathered around him in the paddock, some sitting on hay bales, others standing, sharing stories of war and homecoming that many had never voiced before. Thunder Spirit moved calmly among them, occasionally stopping to rest his head against someone's shoulder or stand quietly beside a veteran overcome with emotion. He seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of which person needed connection in each moment, which needed space, which needed the silent companionship of another being who had known terror and emerged whole. Maria observed from a distance, joined by Ramon and Eleanor, all three watching in wonder as the circle of healing formed spontaneously, broken humans finding comfort in the presence of an animal whose own broken places had become sources of wisdom rather than weakness. "How can a horse who suffered so much still trust humans?" one young veteran asked, his prosthetic legs stretched out before him in the autumn sun. "That's why we're here," Maria answered softly, "to remind ourselves that healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds." As the day drew to a close, Maria led Thunder Spirit to their special place on the hilltop overlooking the center. The setting sun painted the buildings in gold and amber, lights beginning to twinkle against the gathering dusk. Below them, veterans and staff shared dinner at picnic tables, laughter occasionally rising on the evening breeze, a sound of community and tentative joy that had seemed impossible just hours before. "Libertamos un al otro, ¿no es cierto?" she murmured, leaning forward to embrace Thunder Spirit's strong neck. "We freed each other, didn't we?" The stallion responded with a soft nicker that echoed across the valley, no longer a cry of pain, but a declaration of joy. And as they galloped together under Kentucky's starry sky, Maria understood finally that true home wasn't a place. but that sacred space created when two broken souls meet, and together discover that their cracks are exactly where the light manages to enter.